Good Day Utah.
Well, President Barack Obama's climate change proposal rests in the hands of Democrats, including Utah Congressman Jim Matheson.
Matheson is a former energy consultant and key in the climate change debate. He joins us live in studio this morning to tell us more about that and other issues in Washington. You know, we've got a lot to talk about here, so we'll get right to it. You know, do you see eye to eye with what President Obama is trying to get across here with the climate change and the debate here?
I think, first of all, climate change is real, and it's a really complicated issue, too. And the House of Representatives is working on legislation that's actually a little more extreme than I think what the President is looking for. So this is part of a long process we're going to go through in the House to shape this legislation, but we all need to have conversation about this, and I hope it's more of a bipartisan process than it's been so far. I think any major landmark environmental legislation this country's ever enacted, it's always been bipartisan, so I think we should pursue that here as well.
Okay, so where do you stand exactly on this issue as far as what President Obama wants to do, and why should Utahns care about this?
Well, two things. First, Obama doesn't have a complete legislative package he's put out. He hasn't done that. There is a bill that's moving its way through the House. The version that went through the committee I'm on, I voted against last week because I think it has some components in it that actually would have pretty negative impacts on energy prices in this country. But I think it's a work in progress, and we're going to keep going on that. The reason Utahns should be concerned is that climate change is happening. You talk to the folks at Ski Utah. Ski resorts are very concerned, for example, about shortening of the ski season. You talk to the hunting community about habitat in this state and the effect that climate change has on that. You talk to people in the agricultural community. So there are a lot of folks who know that this is an issue that could have some big long-term impacts. We just got to be thoughtful about how we approach it.
But what about, I'm sorry, what about businesses? This effect having a negative impact on businesses and then possibly taxing more, taxes going up to pay for these?
Well, that's the big question. You got to figure out a way, if we're going to have a transition to different ways that we produce energy, to mitigate that. And that's been my concern all along about the way this legislation is being crafted. You got to make sure that we allow innovation to actually take place in this country instead of slamming requirements on people right away.
One thing we want to ask you about that a lot of people are talking about right now, it's on a lot of people's minds, what do we do with Guantanamo Bay?
Well,
Congress rescinded funding for it last week, and so that it cannot shut down, where should we put those people? It's about 250 people.
Well, first of all, the idea to rescind the funding was because there wasn't a plan about what to do. So the funding was to shut it down. It sounds like when you say funding is going away, that takes funding away from operating. It was actually funding to move it, but there was no plan on where we were going to move folks. So I think that's actually kind of a reasonable request. We ought to have a plan in mind before we stop doing what we are doing. I think a lot of folks recognize it's important ultimately that Guantanamo is shut down. I think it should be too, but I think we ought to have a plan about what we do next.